Welcome back to the Accounting Working Group podcast. I'm your host, Sean Stein Smith, and I am thrilled to be joined this month by two thought leaders, influencers, forward thinkers, any other label you possibly thought of. Two individuals who really are on the cutting edge of blockchain adoption and then tokenized assets. And I'm absolutely pumped to have David Pope back on the podcast once again, and Anthony Apollo on his first of hopefully many podcast interviews. David, Anthony, it's an absolute blast having you on here, and I'll ask you both to just do a quick introduction of you and your current role. David, want to start?
Sure, thanks. I really appreciate it, Dr. Stein Smith. Sean, this is something where you and I go back a few years, and it's been just a lot of fun doing what we've done here in Wyoming and watching you progress through the years and all of that as well. It's wonderful. So I got started in the blockchain realm back in 2017 when I first started helped start the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition. Then we in Wyoming went and got a few bills passed by the state of Wyoming legislature. Then I was appointed to the first Wyoming Legislative Blockchain Task Force, which then later on became the Wyoming Select Committee on Blockchain. I was appointed as one of the governor's liaisons to that select committee last year. But throughout the time, it's just been a great thing to be able to work through all of the legislation that's been passed in Wyoming. And if your listeners aren't familiar with that legislation, they should look into it. It is comprehensive, and it is powerful on a state level. And I'm a CPA here in Wyoming, and that's my day job. But the rest of it has just been great fun. And so I'll hand it over to Anthony after this.
Thank you, Commissioner Pope and Dr. Stein Smith. Thank you for having me on this month's podcast as well. Truly appreciate the opportunity. So you've got Anthony Apollo here. I am currently serving as the Executive Director of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. I've been in that role for just over a year. And before my tenure here, I split my career pretty much 50-50 with the first half in traditional finance. So looking at some of the GSIBs, particularly around regulatory reporting and regulatory transformation in the wake of the 2008 recession. And through that role, really learned how some of our largest financial institutions work and at times don't work. And at the same time, simultaneously, was learning about blockchain. A friend introduced me to both Bitcoin and Ethereum in the fall of 2015. And seeing what was going on in some of the banks, and then seeing an alternative in digital assets that were immutable, peer-to-peer, you build on an open ledger. That was a tectonic difference in my eyes, and something that could create great efficiencies for the financial sector, far beyond any of the things that cropped up along the way, like ICOs and NFTs. To me, the technology has always been about the efficiencies and the transparency that could be gained in financial and other types of transactions. So I started learning more and more from 2015 on. I joined a firm called Consensus, which is an Ethereum incubator in Brooklyn in the fall of 2017. And since then, between Consensus and my own personal startups, I've worked at everything from tokenized intellectual property, tokenized multimedia content licenses, so video games, music, movies, and creating attribution for the owners and creators of that content, doing real-time payouts to content creators, and codified royalties on smart contracts. So just ways for people to enjoy content and actually pay the creators that put the time and effort to make that, rather than having to go through a series of multiple intermediaries to do so. And at one point along that trajectory, even had an opportunity to work on what I believe is one of, if not the first, compliant debt security tokens on chain. I worked with an NBA athlete named Spencer Dinwiddie, then on the Brooklyn Nets, then currently on the Dallas Mavericks after a stint on the Lakers, to do a tokenized bond on Ethereum. And for the investors in that instrument, which was a whole, Reg D filing, went through all the processes for that. For the holders of that tokenized bond, we had payouts provided monthly using stable tokens, particularly the Paxos stable coin that was available at the time. So that's where my stable token and stable coin experience started. And I think that's a great segue into how the stable token concept in Wyoming came to be.
Absolutely. And it's almost as if you have the exact list of questions that I was going to ask. Funny how that works. Yeah, so how did this whole stable token idea come to be, right? Because obviously privately issued stable coins have been around for a while. Companies issue their own, including PayPal. But how did this sort of state-based token idea kind of get off the ground?
Well, I think, in the spirit of some of the participants in our presidential debates, yes, we did get the general outline of the questions ahead of time. But that's still, I love the kind of the flow of these podcasts because they allow us to kind of venture off into other areas too. And a good thing to talk about after I go through this will be for Anthony to discuss a little bit of what makes a state stable token different than a Wyoming stable token different from a traditional privately issued stable token. But really, it all kind of morphed out of our origins with the Wyoming legislature. On the first blockchain task force, we discussed in pretty well in-depth detail the idea of putting together a state cryptocurrency. And initially, the thought was to use it, as an encapsulated system within, like, the University of Wyoming and other state institutions, where we could leave cash at the door, and the cryptocurrency would act as the means of transfer within those institutions, so that we could, obtain better accounting control over a cashless system and achieve lower fees for the state rather than credit card fees and stuff like that. But we found out quickly that was unconstitutional, and
it's a minor problem.
Yeah, and that was a little bit of a problem to overcome. And so we set that idea aside, and apparently Senator Rothfuss, who was a state senator from Laramie, Wyoming, he kept mulling it over and occasionally would talk about some additional ideas. And then, as an absolute surprise to everyone, he produced a bill in 2022 that came before the legislature. And I would say, for an accountant, I was giddy. I may have smiled once, but I was thrilled, honestly, to see it. And I thought it would not have a chance, even in Wyoming, of passing. But the bill passed that year, and Governor Gordon vetoed it. He believed at that time that it just wasn't fleshed out enough. It didn't have enough protections for the state in it. And so it was vetoed. And any vetoed bill automatically comes up again the following interim period as an interim topic. It was considered again. They made some changes, and they put it back together for the 2023 legislative session. It passed again. The governor was a little more amenable to it,
Mhm.
and he signed it into law. It became law like March or April of 23. The great thing about it is that the new iteration of it contained better protections for the state, and it separated and segregated the Wyoming Stable Token Commission into a separate corporation and body politic that has specific meaning within the law. But it gives us a certain amount of autonomy that most state agencies don't have. And so it has given us the ability to truly sit down and create what will be a wonderful product for the marketplace. And so now I think I should turn it over to Anthony to let him explain how what the difference is between a stable token and a stable coin, and why this becomes a great thing for a state to accomplish.
Absolutely. Anthony, take it away.
Yeah, I do. So I think just to touch on one thing that Commissioner Pope mentioned just a second ago, one of the reasons we refer to this as a stable coin, a stable token versus a stable coin, is because of some of those constitutional challenges that Commissioner Pope brought up a few moments back, which is states cannot create their own currency, cannot create their own coin. And we are certainly not trying to do that. One of the things that I always make sure I mention first off when I speak to parties who are interested in learning more about the Wyoming stable token is we are certainly not creating a CBDC. Right? We're not creating a Wyoming coin. We're not trying to mint tokens and create funds out of the ether, not intended. We are looking to deploy a fiat-backed and fully reserved stable token. So in that capacity, an initial offering might look a lot like USDC from Circle, like the PYUSD offering from Paxos, and some of the other incumbents in the space. And I will already just start to add a couple of asterisks here about differentiation. So we expect that we'll be a bit more transparent in our operations. Any private company can essentially change their terms and conditions overnight, and you went to bed thinking your token to be treated one way, you wake up the next morning and they're going to be treated a different way, and you find that out via an email that you got from the company that you don't have any control over. For a state to issue stable token, we need to go through a very robust public process of rulemaking that will dictate in extreme specificity how these tokens are going to operate. So, for example, let's take reserves management. We have a carve out in our statute, the Wyoming Stable Token Act, and specifically the amendments that are put forth during our 2024 legislative session. The dollars we take in for the purchase of stablecoins from consumers, those dollars will only be either A, kept in cash, so we have the ability to meet daily redemption requests. B, they'll be invested in U.S. Treasury securities with a year or less to maturity. Or C, U.S. Treasury security repurchase agreements with 30 days or less to maturity. So that already kind of mitigates some of the risks that we saw with SVB early last year. And we're in this position where we've been able to learn a lot from those who have done this work before, and we can incorporate that into our offering. So that's our statutes. So that's what the legislature works on. That's law. Downstream of that, our agency has the ability, again, because we have somewhat of a different structure than many agencies, we have the ability to make our own rules. And rules are not laws. We are not legislators, but rules do have the form of law in the state, and as such have to go through a fairly robust promulgation process. So what we'll need to do is draft a set of rules about how our reserves will work. That will need to be put forth into a public forum. There'll be a 45-day long comment period that, in which people are able to voice their concerns, their thoughts, their support. And that'll all need to be considered before we're actually able to promulgate the rules fully and then launch the token. And for reserves management, again, those are things that might be downstream of the statute. So, how we're doing our daily, meeting our daily redemption requests, what is, when we convert back to fiat and we're off blockchain rails, what is the T+1 or T+2, what are the bands around that? return funds to consumers. There's many specifics that we need to figure out that will go into the reserve management piece. Again, that's like one example of how it's going to work. I think one step beyond that is where we go even a bit broader. And I think more importantly, as a agency, we're going to promulgate a similar rule set around the actual, for lack of a better term, token life cycle, which, for the reserves, we can kind of look at what New York DFS has in their guidance. We look at some of the proposed federal legislation around how they purport to treat reserves, because that's where that legislation has to be focused. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any legislation about how a stable token or stable coin would be treated from a set of features and functions. So we're going to need to promulgate a rule set that, again, goes through public scrutiny around how tokens will be minted and issued, redeemed and burned, what potential interdiction looks like to make sure that we are, Wyoming stable tokens are not ending up in nefarious actors. All of that is going to need to be defined before we're able to launch. And I think that is where we can gain a lot of confidence by the consumers that we're not going to be changing our terms on a day-to-day basis. There's a months-long process to accomplish and accommodate that. And having that kind of stability, I think, will be a big value add for us in the market when we launch. I will add a couple of other pieces here and
Yes, go ahead.
to make sure that we're talking about how, others, why using a Wyoming stable token be beneficial versus some of the other incumbents. Going back to our statute, we do have what we refer to as a 102% reserve requirement. So that's 102% reserve over and above the notional amount of tokens outstanding. Give you an example, if there's 100 million Wyoming stable tokens in circulation, that means we need to have $102 million worth of Wyoming stable token, $102 million of reserves that back that. That's defined in the statute, right? And the intention there is that kind of buffer will allow us to mitigate against the risk of any depegging event. And then once that is set up, we have a bit of a cascade of how funds will roll once we start generating interest income on those treasuries and those repos that we're holding in reserve. So the first thing we're doing is we're going to repay all the dollars that we're taking out of the state's general fund. So the fund we've got to get the thing off the ground, we pay that back. Then we establish our 102% reserve. Once that's done, the flow of funds will end up with the agency itself to pay for the operational expenses and a R&D budget, which is perhaps a little openly defined now, but I expect that as part of the reserves management perhaps to be more firmly defined. And that will allow us to do things like explore different use cases, to explore multi-chain deployments, because we do have a remit from the state legislature to be a multi-chain offering. And then after that waterfall happens, on a quarterly basis, any of the remaining funds are swept into the school foundation fund. So that will go pay for schools in the state. And that's why that's a bit of a long-winded explanation, but one of our commissioners, Joe Webble, he has consolidated that into the very brief statement: the Wyoming stable token is for the kids. I think that's how we can get the word out about this being a public goods project, and I'll pause there.
So I mean, I could have you on for the next 4 hours, right? Walking through every single aspect of that brief overview. But one sort of rather obvious question, I think, that I've had, right, as I've heard about the Wyoming stable token, coming and then hiring you and then hiring other people, is there, or rather, how have you dealt with pushback? One, and two, is the sort of goal of this token to be kept inside Wyoming, or are you open to, at some point in the future, having it get into a wider sort of marketplace?
Oh, I think, and if I can take that one, Anthony, to start out with, I think the goal is to have as wide of a use as possible. I don't believe that it will be contained within the borders of Wyoming. We started with kind of a small concept back in 17, but I believe that what our goal, and I think Anthony and everyone else on the commission will echo this. We want to be the gold standard for safety and security and backing and reporting within the entire industry. And that's the I think that is necessary for
Mhm.
us to be successful. And so once you place that as the goal, then you cannot have something that is just contained within the state. Right now, unfortunately, our international funds transfer system is not terribly good.
Mhm.
With the SWIFT system, just the settlements are still can be days or weeks from when a funds transfer is sent overseas. And so I think that because of our backing requirements, because those are statutory,
Mhm.
because we will have the gold standard of reporting on that, I believe there will be the market, a market for the token. That's the answer to your last question.
Mhm.
Um, it really is not my intent, and I certainly don't officially speak for the entire commission, but it is certainly not my intent to keep it within the state of Wyoming.
Mhm. And so to add on that, right? There's obviously been quite a bit talked about in terms of the U.S. Presidential race, which I'm sure everybody who is tuning into this podcast has probably heard about. It is kind of been in the headlines. So there has been quite a bit talked about in terms of where Bitcoin might fit. And I'm going off of the pre written questions here, guys. So how or how why and how much would a Wyoming token, as outlined here and as sort of planned out, how would that fit into a broader conversation about crypto being used as a strategic tool? How would that work? How would that play out ideally? And obviously, I should add this caveat, and I'll also add it into any blurbs that accompany our episode. All of the views and comments on this podcast are just the opinions of the people on this podcast. They are not official government announcements or anything else like that. So, how would a Wyoming token of this kind, as outlined, sort of fit into that? I believe, this broader conversation as how crypto. I know the focus has been on Bitcoin, as a asset for the country.
I'm more than happy to take that one. I just
Sure,
kind of want to revert just a moment to your previous question. So
sure.
I just want to piggyback on what Commissioner Pope said, which is this Wyoming stable token, I believe, will be expected to be used where existing stable tokens are. So certainly outside
Okay.
the confines of Wyoming, I would think outside the confines of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would also think when we start talking about decentralized finance and liquidity pools, it would not surprise me if it ends up there. Obviously, we need to have some controls in place, as I said earlier, to make sure that nefarious actors are not using Wyoming stable tokens. So we need to have on-chain analytics to make sure that we're monitoring all of that. But I would think this would be fairly robustly used cross-jurisdictionally and even in DeFi. Again, my own personal opinion. In terms of how we have perhaps dealt with some of those who stand in opposition to the project or who have voiced their concerns during, let's say, the public comment period, because we are a public entity, we have monthly meetings and we do allow public comment during those meetings. I think it's important to hear from the community. For us, we're in a listening mode right now. We have not
Sure.
launched anything yet, so we need to hear all these concerns. We did recently add a series of FAQs to our webpage, which is stabletoken.wyo.gov, because we've heard some of these questions. And from my own perspective, I've been firmly in the bubble for about 10 years. For the first couple of years, I was in the broader digital asset industry. I did a pretty decent job of extricating myself from time to time, but this has been my life for about a decade. So I need to take a step back and also think about those for whom this is still new and make sure that we are building from the ground up and creating educational resources along the way. So I respond to the question about some of the pushback in that capacity. Going on to the third topic here, which is the role of, broadly speaking, crypto digital assets in the national conversation, particularly pertaining to this election cycle. It's interesting to see that, and I'm not necessarily into the political sphere, so this may be I believe this is a correct quote, but I'm not going to put my reputation line for it. I do believe that the crypto industry writ large is one of, if not the biggest funder of political campaigns in this election cycle.
Yes, it is.
That comes
Yep,
from,
correct.
Okay. So I'm not too far off.
No,
That's good.
no.
So, Fair Shake and Stand With Crypto and all of that. So it's been interesting to see how this has developed. And I'm probably not going to discuss, the candidates' positions. I think, just generally speaking, in the public forum, you have Donald Trump supported this technology a few months back, and now we're seeing the Harris campaign come along and do the same within essentially the last week. But from my perspective, we start talking about the stable token specifically and its role in United States politics. I will always defer to the power of the dollar. I think there is warranted concern about the BRICS coalition that is looking to onboard new members, such as Saudi Arabia, who also came off the petrodollar agreement this year. You have Russia, the Bank of Russia has said the digital ruble will be enforced by July of 2025. The Chinese yuan has been live for several years. India is testing a digital rupee. And I would characterize the United States, in stark opposition to how we typically have operated, is behind on innovation in this capacity. I don't know how much of an appetite there is for a domestic CBDC. To my knowledge, Wyoming is the only state working on a stable token initiative. So the onus is on us. And what I point to from how we fit into this big picture is, and again, my own personal perspective, is the conversation around the US debt. US debt is now, the national debt's about $35 trillion. The interest payment on that debt will surpass $1 trillion this year. That is more than the military and the educational budget combined. And I think that's, first of all, that's just a scary number to begin with. Yes. And then secondly, when you have that much debt, you're going to need buyers for that debt. Traditionally, the two largest holders who have been foreign interests are China, who sold off about 25% of their holdings over the last several years. And then Japan is number one, about $1.2 trillion of US debt on their books. And based on what's happening in their economy, that could change significantly pretty rapidly. And when those are potentialities, we need to talk about net new buyers of US debt. And stable coins have emerged as one of those potential options. So if you were looking at fiat-backed stable coins in aggregate, they would be in the top 20 purchasers and holders of US debt. And I think if more stable tokens become more adopted, they could become larger buyers of US debt. That doesn't necessarily solve our problem. I would say far from it, but at least could be one critical mitigation factor when it comes to talking about things like a failed treasury auction. So I will pause there, and Commissioner Pope, happy to get your thoughts on that.
Don't really have much more in the way of thoughts on that. I think part of your other question was how have we answered and met resistance to the stable token, and we really haven't had much in the way of resistance. There are a certain number of people who have questioned the state's role in providing this type of product, and I think there's certainly a role for the state, and there's certainly a reason why there is a place for a state in this. And Anthony, Director Paulo, outlined a couple of those reasons in that what we will be developing will be additional buyers for the US dollar, essentially. And then the second thing is I think the entire industry is crying for some standardization. And I think statutorily, we are developing that standardization, and through the rulemaking process here, we are trailblazing in that standardization. I know the AICPA has been grappling with some of the reporting and auditing concepts that we will be essentially setting the rules for. And so I think there's plenty of reason a state should be involved at this level. Again, if we can set the gold standard for safety, security, backing, and reporting, then I think the benefits to the rest of the economy are apparent.
Mm-hmm. No, and I mean, I'm fully on board with this effort. I think it's a awesome idea. You know, I have had the great opportunity to travel out to Wyoming to actually offer expert testimony to the committee back in, I believe it was 2021. And yeah, I mean, I am all on board, and I'm very much in favor of this project, and I really am happy with the thorough way in which, you know, you, David, Anthony, and the whole commission and the whole government apparatus out in Wyoming have been trying to do it right the first time. Um, and so to wrap up our conversation, do you have a timeline for launch, even an estimated launch of this token?
So I think we're going to target a Q1, end of Q1 2025 launch. We're looking to back into that through a couple of different work streams. One that we've discussed in detail already has been the rulemaking process, which again, there's statutory requirements to have a public comment 45 days. That's going to push us out X amount. But for us, the main piece of work for the commission at this point in time is our procurement process. So the state is not going to ask for more money to build a whole team, to build everything from scratch internally. The goal for us is to engage with experienced third parties that have performed the functions and features that we need for several years, have processed X number of transactions, Y amount of transfer value, those who have really done it before and created secure and robust offerings that, you know, as Commissioner Pope said, Wyoming's reputation as a state is you know, on the line here. So we need to make sure we're being very thorough about that. And that selection process will take several months. We need to do a pre-qualification process first to say, and here's the metrics we need for whomever is going to be building our smart contracts or for the exchange that we expect to list the tokens on so we can get into better circulation. You know, there's on-chain analytics, there's, you know, financial audit needs to happen, the code audit needs to happen, all of that needs to be we need to have a pre-qualification process for all of the counterparties who wish to do that. So we'll narrow that funnel down, and then we'll have a request for proposal process expected to pick up in late November that will run through perhaps the holidays and wrap up early next year. And then we look to engage with these vendors and then start putting the pieces together and doing some robust testing. From my personal perspective, the groups we would look to work with and collaborate with and engage, because they've done it before, I don't particularly think the build is going to take an extremely long amount of time. Right? We're looking to use tech that's already kind of out there and well structured and defensible. For us, the main challenge is going to be to define the offering vis-a-vis what ends up in the pre-qualifications, or we need this structure, that, you know, this function, the token. And once we define all of that and RFPs are live, I think we'll be in pretty good shape, and that'll allow us to hit some of the marks that we're targeting.
All right, so you all heard it here first. Wyoming Stable Token penciled in for the end of Q1 2025. Anthony, David, it was an absolute privilege to have you here on the podcast. I know that I really appreciated the sort of in-depth sort of look that all of us on the outside sort of got into how this whole token came to be, all of the players that had to be involved, and then all of the work that actually still has to be done to have this token operate as advertised and to create the benefits that sort of are driving this whole project. Again, I am a big supporter of this idea, and I'm personally very interested in watching how the project grows, develops, and then ultimately actually goes live. So I will be absolutely bothering both of you in Q1 of 25 for a update and possibly a post-launch episode, sort of, talking through how everything went, lessons learned, and all of that good stuff. But again, David, Anthony, absolute pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you for having us. This was a real pleasure, and I'm looking forward to doing it again, and I'm looking forward to providing good news in Q1.
Absolutely.
Likewise, thank you for having us. And one last note from my side, I remind your viewers that all of our meetings of the commission do occur in a public forum. So if you're interested in following our progress as we move forward, you can check out stabletoken.wyo.gov. Our calendar is there. You could attend in person, you could attend remotely, you could ask questions during the public comment sessions of those discussions. And we look forward to your participation.
All right. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank
Talk
you.
soon.
Cheers.